Who wants the first?
I can take it first.
First, second, third, Kurt.
Hello. Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Tobias, you mentioned one of the key problems is the EU Water Directive, where you're not allowed to grant any permits to any type of operation that could potentially impact surrounding water systems. That not only for the mining industry, but for any type of industrial activities, it's virtually impossible not to temporarily impact the water system. How will you fix that in the Swedish legislation? Are your hands tied down by the EU director? What can you do about it?
But actually, for me, that's the most problematic issue here. The other one, I can see that you can manage. This is one more problematic because this legislation is very strong. Of course, you have openness that you actually can define what's the impact, what's the base level here. And it might turn out when you look into these areas, and with those water deposits, you might define them wrongly from the beginning in Sweden. And it turns out that you can balance this a little bit, that you actually can have this business in that sense that you actually can accept it. But it's very difficult. And it needs a very huge work from both companies and the water agencies to actually work together to, what I can see, to reach this level that you actually can see what impact will you have, what's the natural level of impact in this area, because we have already business and it will impact, and you can have different measurement historically, which is might turn out to not be correct exactly or very close to, but so you need to work in a system much more pragmatic, especially for, I would say from the agency side, to actually work together with the companies to deal with this issue, get a much more better understanding how you impact and what should actually is the possibility to accept this business. Because otherwise it's not only, you have the same problem for most industries, especially in the north, when you have a lot of water deposits.
Okay, thank you.
Can you show the slide of the permitting process? I want to challenge it.
Back is the low one, yeah.
Yeah, that one that you had. Yeah. It's not an extraction permit. It's an exploitation concession.
Yes.
It doesn't permit you to do anything.
No.
I mean, the more appropriate definition is probably like deposit allocation. That together with the environmental permit gives you a permit to extract. And that's a problem that we've experienced, from the local acceptance, where people believe that by getting the bearbetningskoncession, they're going to start digging a hole. It's not about that. It's about ensuring the exclusivity of the deposit for the company that is looking to invest more. And by having that exclusivity, you can motivate the exponential incremental investments to further define and study it towards the environmental permit. So that was just one thing. Another the discussion topic more is where we tend to be stuck looking in the rear view mirror. And you have this flowing through the permitting process as well, where, for example, you always need a Natura 2000 permit, as it is today, if it's the typical type of activity that causes harm. However, you tend to look back at how has mining been built in the past, whereas with industrial development, the new technologies, increased criteria for environmental impact, like a future mine will not look like the typical mine in the past. Is that something you're taking into account in like the proposals in the investigation?
We try to, because it's related to how you look into this business and how it works today, because you have bad examples for mining in Sweden also, which I heard, I don't know how many times. It's very, very, very few, but this bad reputation is going for the whole for the whole business, and then it's a huge step to actually explain how this business is working today, because you don't really understand it, especially if you go to regions in Sweden which has not been mined before, like in Norra Kärr. It's big difference compared to discussing in northern Sweden compared to Norra Kärr. Even if you go to Skåne and the exploration, what you want to do there, they don't understand the business at all. So of course you need to work with this and include it also into the permit system, that you actually understand the impact and the business side even better. Because I have seen weaknesses here. And you just mentioned they have like extraction permit. I totally agree, because many times these wordings get your wrong sense of what you're discussing here. And in some legislation you don't use this word. It's more related that you actually have the exclusivity to have a mine here, and not telling that you're now not allowed to it, because you need a mental permit, and you might turn out that you don't get it, or it gets too expensive to do business with these requirements you get in a mental permit. So, and that I think is very problematic, especially discussion with courts and some agencies also, that actually they don't understand how this works and what this stands for, especially for the mining law, and what's behind the mining law, and what is required for you to do your business. Why do you have a mining law at all? You can have the question sometimes.
I could talk for hours. I think there's a word that keeps coming up when we're talking, is that we are a business, and sometimes the mining industry gets treated very differently, like we're not a business. But we raise investment capital, we do work, we create economic opportunities, and eventually we might build mines, employ lots of people, and generate economic wealth. And that's been the history of the mining industry in Sweden, creating economic wealth for this country. We talk about the exploitation concession, and I completely agree with Philippe. It gets misunderstood, and when you get stuck at the exploitation concession point, the option value of creating economic activity is just killed. And there are so many challenges that we face in developing mining projects. The system that I've experienced is not one of ever enabling development. You know, we are solutions-focused organizations who come across problems and try and find solutions. And all we come up against is adversarial agencies who give us more problems. But they give us really loose problems they think might be problems, not specific problems and specific questions that we then have to answer. And again, in my experience, the subjectivity which Peter talked about between different agencies, the individuals in different agencies, their narrow interpretation of Sweden's laws. You know, I have heard many politicians, Minister of Enterprise from several years ago, Swedish law is sufficient for assessing mining projects, and any assessment will be by the book. Other ministers talking about predictability and transparency. These are fairly basic requirements for any investor to come to any mining jurisdiction. And we know that last year the Fraser Institute dropped Sweden to 36th position in all countries around on the ranking of investment attractiveness. There is too much subjectivity. There's a lack of objectivity, clearly. And there's seemingly a lack of competence and understanding. And on whatever steps going forward, and I'm hopeful, I remain hopeful, I'm a mining engineer, I'm a natural born optimist, that solutions will be found so that there is far greater collaboration between agencies and business, because together we create the solutions to climate emergency. Not, you know, this fighting has to stop. There's There's a common vision, there's a common goal, and we're all in this together. I didn't really ask a question there. It's more a political statement.
It's a statement, and it's pretty much related for what are my final sentence before, that it's related to the culture, and what I can see that we have moved in the court cases, that we work much more like opponents against you. But in the first instance, we should be parties from the agency side. We work in and try to find solutions. But what happens now, for example, is that you send the country administrative board for the extraction permit, sends their questions to Baystarten, which sends forward these questions to you. You answer Baystarten, and they send the answer to the country administrative board. Why just pick up the phone and discuss and try to understand what you have dealt with? Because it gets so much mistrust and misunderstanding in this that you don't talk to each other. And the same with the mental permit system, that you need to have much more contact with these agencies to solve this around the table. Because they pick up one word and have one interpretation, you have another interpretation of this question, and you try to answer. They get the answer, they think you don't understand what you are doing. And it's just related to the wording. In many cases, not always.
That's my case.
Yeah. So in the pretext for your work on looking over this, it says analyze and suggest changes of approval process so that a large part of the values from mine operations benefit the whole society. And I mean, it's a clear, we need these metals to electrify the world, to achieve the climate goals. But maybe, Norra Kärr, is that Östergötland?
Well, it's on the border of Jönköping and Östergötland.
Yeah. The locals there might disagree. Will these weights change? Because I'm guessing here that the protection laws that have been added over the last 15-20 years have made it much more feasible to stop projects for local areas.
Yeah, it's much more focused on to conserve areas instead of explore these areas. And in our inquiry, we try to find out how can we improve this local acceptance. And it can be through money, but it also relates to how you use these wordings, that you actually understand what they are doing and get trust between the companies and these local landowners, the kommunen and so forth. And I also expect that also the agencies have a role actually to be a bridge between, if you don't have acceptance here, you might need a third party coming in here from outside to actually also explain how this process actually is working. What happens? What are expected? Because most of the time the law is not so bad as it seems sometimes. It's just that we have missed a few parts and create a lot of mistrust in the system.
Anyone in the panel wants famous last word?
And that is a very good idea, because as a mining company we will always be mistrusted. So we're hammered with questions, and we answer them appropriately, but it doesn't really matter in the end, because, well, is that true? So having an objective governmental agency taking that step in between, and whether people trust governmental agencies, is another thing. But at least it takes away that responsibility for us being the answering part. Now, you've indicated a few times the culture within the regional governmental agencies. I think we have to be quite open. It's not only the culture and the structure of how it works. There is political activism, and I think we have to start talking about that openly, and how we deal with that in the sense where should they be? I mean, then they should be clearly stated, and at least we know, this transparency and the certainty around the process. But at the moment, we get so many questions, and you wonder, why is that? Why do we get mistrusted? Why are we the opposing part? And there are specific reasons why that is, political reasons.
Okay.
Sorry, I got one final point. And I think what needs to come back is some balance to the debate, because if you read the papers or listen to the media, you would think that most of Sweden is being mined, whereas we have 12 operating mines in Sweden. And when I presented almost 3 years ago at Future Mine and Mineral, that accounted for 0.02% of the land area. And there are some other users who have rights to over 50% of Sweden to do their practice. So, we need to remember that the mines account for a very small proportion of the entire landmass of the country, and the environmental impacts are perceived to be much, much greater. But the societal benefits that flow from our activities and our business are hugely significant going forward to addressing climate emergency.
Yeah, so there's many factors here, and it's a bit ironic that on the news that the Green Party really wishing for a green world, when they leave the government, your share price increased 15%. So, yeah. And you want nothing more than start mining innovation critical materials.
Just do business.
Yeah. Sorry, Tobias. You can have a short last one here, but then we must leave.
I think it's also what we have to mention and realize is that we have two big mining companies, and one problem is that in Sweden we try to imagine that you also work in this same fashion, that you have a business and it's huge, you have a huge income for selling metals already, and it's not how it works for you. And that understanding is very weak. And it's also so related. They understand the system. They don't know which people they should talk to. They know them by name. But if you go to an agency in Sweden today, you get as we have, a short list, not my name. It's just an input to the agency, and you don't know a person, which they see this mail or they see this phone. And it's a big difference, actually, also.
Okay. I'll interpret what you said positively and hope for the beginning of the solution. So.
Yeah, I think it's you can see that it can be improvements, and we have a debate now which is much more positive than actually only for 1 year ago. That we actually can see that we want to need these metals in Europe, in Sweden, and we see the downside much more also, that we have an important local impact in other areas of the world, and actually that we have the possibility to actually do this in much better way and be a good example.
Okej, så jag byter till svenska lite. Ska vi ge Tobias, Kurt, Filip och Peter en applåd och hoppas att dessa herrar tillsammans får tillstånd och pengar att fortsätta elektrifiera världen.